So I'd like to give you a little background. Right after the election, a group of 30-plus women came together because we were concerned about the political climate at the time. And what we wanted to do, we determined, was to be a positive force moving forward. So out of those meetings came this committee, Education Committee, and this evening we want to bring to you our mission. Our mission, number one, is to learn more about civic literacy in our schools, plural. Number two, to support our teachers in their work in schools and out of schools. And third, our, excuse me, a minute. And the third is that we want to foster civic literacy in our communities. So right now I'd like to introduce our panel. There were supposed to be 5 people on the panel. 2 of them can't be here this evening. Tim Smith from Long Trail had a conflict. His conflict is to be at Long Trail coaching students this evening. And unfortunately, Craig Hannum from Manchester Elementary School is down at the hospital in Bennington with his mom this evening. So we keep him in our thoughts. What I wanted to tell you about Craig is that this past spring, he received the VFW Civic Teacher of the Year Award. So we were very proud of him. So now to our panel. This is Eric Schatz, and Eric Schatz has been at Manchester Elementary School since 2007. And most of the years he's been teaching primary school, the little ones. But this year he's been upstairs. He went upstairs to 4th grade. And this past year he taught all the 4th graders social studies and literacy. So I'd like to share a little bit about him. He received his bachelor's degree in elementary education from SUNY New Paltz and earned graduate credits in both science and language arts at Castleton and Bennington College. His wife has started, and he have started nonprofits, 2 nonprofits since 2000. One offers low-income opportunities in the arts called Art Lab in Saugerties, New York. The other is in the community garden on Bradford Street in Bennington. He also served on the Social Studies Committee at the BRSU it's a community-wide effort, a district-wide effort. Outside of school, he enjoys Aikido, carpentry, playing music, and being outside as much as possible. Thank you, Eric. Jeff Chamberlain. From Manchester, used to be Manchester Elementary, now at Maple Street School. He received his bachelor's degree from Middlebury College in English with a concentration in U.S. history and nautical studies. He received his Master's of Arts in Teaching from Castleton State. He has worked in many educational settings, both public and independent, including Burr & Burton, Manchester Elementary, Stratton Mountain School. He has served as an international teacher in the World Teach program in Thailand and teaching middle school and high school English classes. And third panelist is John Graff. And John Graff is the Social Studies Department Chair at Burr & Burton Academy, where he teaches grades 9 through 12. His courses include Freshman Humanities, 10th and 11th grade World and U.S. History, AP U.S. History, and AP Government. During his 19 years in education, 17 at Burr & Burton, John has served as JV girls lacrosse coach, freshman class advisor, as well as chaperone for student trips to China, Washington, D.C., and post-Katrina New Orleans. John recently received one of Burr & Burton's Roland Chairs, awarded each year to acknowledge and honor teachers who are innovative, who inspire students and their peers, and who clearly have committed their hearts and souls to meeting the mission and vision of the school. He lives in Pollitt with his wife and fellow educator Sarah and his 2 children, Weston and Emma. Thank you, John. And our moderator this evening is Peg Gregory, and Peg will give us the format.
Great. So first I just want to thank GNet for being here tonight with us to tape this proceeding. And so a few words about the format. We, as a committee, have formulated 4 questions that we're going to put to the panelists. We're going to go in this order. So Eric and then Jeff and John speaking to elementary, middle and high school students. We'll give each of you up to 5 minutes to answer each question, and I get the enviable task of being timekeeper. So I'll kick you under the table if you're going over. And we're asking the audience to please hold your questions until the end. So if you have a question that comes up early, you might want to jot it down so that you don't forget. And we'll take all the questions at the end of the panel discussion. Okay. So the first question we have for you is to ask you to please define civics literacy for us and speak to your role as an educator in teaching civics literacy.
Okay. So it's a fairly new territory for me coming out of 1st and 2nd grade classrooms where civics is more, well, it's a social program. So to me, civics literacy has to begin with the notion that each and every one of us has a responsibility to either add value to the community we live in or work in, or the society in which we live. And for young people specifically in the elementary grades, I think this starts at home and in the community and in the micro communities in which kids dwell. Circles of friends, classrooms, the playground, clubs, teams. And I think my role as the teacher of civics, and at this level anyway, is to guide them to view their own actions as something that is adding value to their community or not. And to engage them in seeing that and observing that in themselves and in others. This is sort of a foundational part of what we call our social curriculum at MEMS, which focuses more on the behavioral aspects of community, membership in a community, rather than the civics. But the idea is foundational, the idea that you're doing things that have consequences, your actions have consequences, and that these can either add value to the community or they can take value away from the community. So that awareness, I think, is just foundational to civics literacy at this age. And next, I think that it's important that the kids see real-world confrontation. I mean, they experience this all the time at school and at home. And it can be in the form of communication, it can be in the form of debate or argument, and I think it's important that they learn to be aware of argument as a form of communication, or debate as a form of communication. So in the classroom, I try to allow disagreements to, kind of roll out organically, and I try to guide that and make sure that people are being respectful. And at some point, they should begin to understand that having a position is a good thing, and that you can use your thinking, you can use facts, use details, concepts, things that you know are true to back your argument up or back your position up. So I think debating and arguing are fundamental to civic life, and that most students don't have these skills at 4th grade anyway, and it's something that they need to learn explicitly. And so I'm no expert in the art of debating, but it's just some of those basics, the respect, the backing up your position, are really important for them to understand and learn. As you know, the consequences of not being able to do that are monumental. From the home all the way up into our world communities. If you're going to work at the United Nations, or if you're going to work in the school cafeteria or in a small business, you've got to know how to deal with confrontation. And so I think it's important that kids learn debating and arguing. And so I'm just kind of getting into this as of this past year, because with 4th graders it was a little more doable, just as far as like learning an explicit way of arguing than it was in 1st and 2nd grade. It's a hard piece to grasp at that level. Right, Caden?
I tend to try and simplify it for my own sake, and so for me, it's civics literacy is what is government, what's its role, how does it work, and what is our place, your place, as a member of society, as a citizen. From there, I think you start kind of moving outwards. I imagine it's in the center and we move outwards. And I think naturally, and you've already spoken to this, Eric, a little, the relevance. If you're going to talk about that, you're going to talk about your local government. You're going to talk about even the school government, the student council. You're going to talk about state government. You're going to talk about national government. I think those, and what tends to, for me, I use current events a lot to act as an access point to learning about civics. I think that's probably, in terms of as an educator, what's my role is really trying to find the entry points for all the students to access what can be, I don't know, if you say civics, it can sound like, oh no, civics. I don't know, I've always felt, what does that mean? It can be very difficult. I try to probably never even use the word civics in the classroom. I might sneak some of this stuff under their nose. It's something, I teach 5th through 8th grade, so it's something I'm nibbling at constantly rather than it's a section or a unit part of what we're doing for this 6-week period, and not to come back to it. It's something you keep coming back to. In terms of our own history within the country, kids are very curious about the Revolutionary period at Maple Street. The entirety of U.S. history is taught in just 8th grade. So you have to pick your spots and your holes and you go deep in a few. And if I ever ask the kids, what are you really interested in learning this year? They all are very curious about the Revolutionary period and the Constitution. And when you ask kids, particularly in 7th and 8th grade, there's a lot of, I know these words, I know these things, I know democracy, I've heard about right wing, what are they talking about? Liberals, what do they mean? When you ask them, their questions kind of just keep pouring out. And I think we'll get to this later in some of the questions, but how you go about doing that, there's different activities. But all of it for me is about trying to find some sort of entry point to this concept of what is government, why do we even have it, as much as if sometimes I tell the kids, if you had a plane, the Lord of the Flies scenario, if you had a plane that crashed on an island and there's no adults to tell you how you should do this, how would you organize? And none of these kids have read Lord of the Flies, so they don't need to worry about any issues with boulders or anything like that. But how would you organize? And so any method I can get them kind of engaged in government and its role, and then getting into their role and the idea of an active role versus a passive role. And identifying the people in their lives who are active agents in their community, things like that. So again, I like to keep it kind of simple and then work my way out.
Right. For the hopefully not sound too repetitive, I see civic literacy kind of being broken down into 3 kind of major components. The first one is the knowledge, having the knowledge of how the government, how the community works, both local, state, national, global. And also having knowledge of the history behind that. So that's the first piece. The next piece I would see tied into that is understanding the role of the citizen or the individual within in that process, again, at those various levels. And then the final piece, which is probably the most challenging as an educator and as a community, is fostering continued interest, passion, responsibility to participate in that process. So that's kind of that third and final piece. And you're without any, if you're missing any of those 3 pieces, you're kind of failing in the hopes of having a kind of civically literate students society. So as an educator, both as an individual and then also thinking about educational community here, my colleagues at Burton, I feel it's really our responsibility to kind of address those three areas, and that starts all the way down at the elementary school with some, the early exposure to community, early exposure to, kind of political socialization, understanding, the basics. So when I take my son and daughter into the voting booth, they have an understanding of what's going on, both because I've informed them, since they're so lucky to have a father who's a social studies teacher, but also because they're exposed at school. And then, it follows up through the middle school and all the way up to the high school. So there's that knowledge of how the systems work. There's an understanding of the role, the individual's role in it, and then hopefully, the continued fostering of that interest and passion. So throughout the different grade levels, there's different opportunities to introduce students to different issues, to different topics that might interest them. And so maybe in sophomore year, when they're exposed to the expansion of rights in a democratic society, and we look at the women's rights movement, we look at the civil rights movement, that might really interest them and get them interested in how you bring about change. Junior year, when they're taking a class that looks at the proper role of government in society in the United States, and so we go back through the history, 20th century history of American government, and at the end they're looking at current issues, and they're hopefully maybe they're engaged to learn more about issues of food, or issues regarding education, or issues regarding poverty, and they're starting to develop their own understanding, their own belief about what the proper role of government is, and then how they can go about continuing to try to foster that proper role, either at the local, the state, the national level.
Well, thank you for that perfect segue, because the next question has to do with engagement, and we'd like each of you to speak a bit about successes that you've experienced in fostering engagement in your students around civic literacy, and speak maybe to something you've done or something you would like to do toward that.
Okay. Well, I don't know how permanently successful I've been in this department, but I have noticed that kids feel comfortable enough to speak their minds in my class, and I think that's a good first step. Just not shutting each other down, and just having the ability to express an opinion or take a stance on something, and keep that conversation going has been good, and I think beneficial. But this past year was my first year teaching 4th grade. And we studied American Revolution and the tensions building up to the revolution, which was really interesting. And Suzanne and Irene were in my classroom for a lot of that, and it was, the kids, they were really passionate and excited about this. So as part of our unit, we learned about 6 historical figures from the time period, and they were on opposing, 3 were on one side, 3 were on the other side of whether or not we should become our own country, become a sovereign nation. So the kids got roles, and some of them were patriots, some of them were loyalists, and we had a debate. So I had them work on their plan for the debate. They developed their platform, their position. They came up with questions for the opposing members. They created masks, so they had these little masks of like Sam Adams and people like that, Ben Franklin, and they had props and things just to make it kind of authentic and have fun with it. And really, it was a mock debate. It was not something where they had to worry about how they were going to perform, because it was just for practice, really, in debating. The students were really serious about it, and they were very articulate in their arguments. I was pleasantly surprised. I hadn't done a whole lot of work with them about debating at this point. I had hoped to, but I didn't do as much as I wanted to. They were very respectful. They were very serious about it. They came up with great counter-arguments, which was really nice to see. They used their original positions to come back to sort of keep them grounded in their arguments. And they had some surprising moments where they came up with some funny comments that nobody expected, that were right on task and right on target. So it was really an entertaining debate, I think you would agree. We really enjoyed it. They had a lot of fun with it. The kids enjoyed it. There was a lot of nervousness. and worry before we started, but you know, once things got going, they were really into it. So I hope to use this project again this year, and I hope to teach more of the art of debating, the art of argument with them. I'd like to see the kids debate on other topics too, and have this be more of like a continuous practice. It's going to be a challenge, like it always is in elementary schools, to squeeze in social studies. Science is the same way. You know, and our job as teachers is just to find novel and creative ways to squeeze these things in. So we do it, and I look forward to trying more of this debating and arguing in the classroom, because they really enjoyed it, and I think it can really crack open a lot of the issues, especially current events and issues that they want to talk about and they want to learn about. So I hope to do that more this year.
You know, role-playing is definitely something that works really well in the social studies classroom. Role-playing, debate, and I use mock trials quite a bit. I'll speak to one. My dad is always in the audience. He's always my designated judge. He comes dressed and everything. We've done some fun ones.
Can I sub you out, Jay?
He's good. He's really good. But yeah, you can. Yeah, he comes appropriately dressed for the time period. So it's very good. We've done with 8th grade. We've done Anne Hutchinson. We've done Salem witch trials. This past year, we finally did one that I've always wanted to do, but I knew it was a really daunting task. But it seemed appropriate at the time. It went really well. We put Lincoln on trial for. We impeached President Lincoln. And a lot of the kids, this was probably in December, and a lot of the kids, obviously when Obama was president, when Bush was president, there's a lot of talk of impeachment, and of course after Trump was elected, there was already a lot of just talk of impeachment, and a lot of this came also from the fact the kids just didn't know what impeachment meant. And I thought I kind of did, and I thought, you know, what is the whole process? And this will be fun, but it really took some research. I'm forgetting the name of the author, but there was a book put out about impeaching the impeachment of Lincoln. It was a fictional, obviously historical novel. And it was great, and these kids got really, really into it in the debate over, part of when we do Lincoln is to try and break down the myth and get to the man, but just getting into the constitutional issues that were involved was very exciting to them. And when you keep seeing what's happening in the news and looking at these constitutional questions, and the fact that it's not cut and dry, that it's all interpretation, and there's a lot of factors at play, I thought it went really well, and this group of kids did a great job. And when I talk about entry points, I mean, this was role playing, and then also acting like they were in a courtroom is fun. We finally did it. We brought in all the parents as the Senate, and they voted. And Lincoln was not impeached. It was close. A couple counts. I think we only did like 3 counts. One was suspension of habeas corpus. Another was First Amendment, infringement on First Amendment rights of freedom of the press, freedom of speech. But it was a lot of fun. And that was very successful. I do constitutional convention videos. And that's a role playing. I had 2 groups where they were competing PBS video. They were both competing to put something into fictional PBS program where they wanted 10-minute YouTube videos, and they were out there looking for companies that would do this, and they were the finalists. So I pitted these 2 groups of 8 kids against each other, and they basically were trying kind of summarize somehow in an exciting and engaging way the complexities of the constitutional debates and whatever, but what are the issues they're arguing about. And it was really interesting to see how they did it differently. And the only thing they had to do is if they were role playing, they had to use the actual words of whoever they were. So you can go back to Federalist Papers, and you can go back to different letters, and you can just take quotes. And it's tough for them in the beginning, but they really got into it. And they were able to really see things from different perspectives, and then you pull it together later and you talk about it. Those have both been very successful and things that I want to do more of. They take a tremendous amount of time. And so the good stuff, that is the stuff that sinks in with kids regarding any aspect of social studies, but with civics, they could take a really long time. And then somebody says, well, you never covered this. You never covered this. So why don't they know anything about this aspect of our history? And you say, but this was very enriching. It wasn't just on the surface. It was very deep learning. And in the end, if you can inspire them to go further, because we have them for a very limited amount of time. I mean, we need them to be independent thinkers, and that's what you want. Independent citizens to go out on their own and ask good questions and try and research them and try and find out more and not feel satisfied with I know enough. And so some of these, that's ultimately, I feel, the goal. And so anyway, those were two examples of success.
So just to start thinking about Burn as a whole in terms of civic literacy, just kind of give you a picture of some ways in which students are exposed. Not every student takes a civics class, but there's so many different avenues in which they're exposed to civics, the civic literacy. If they're up at the mountain campus, they're learning how to be environmental stewards. They're traveling through Vermont, they're meeting with representatives up in Montpelier. If they're in the Model UN class, they're looking at global issues. If they're in Corey's Contemporary Issues class, they're looking at current events and developing a better understanding, getting that knowledge piece so they can develop their own understanding and their own perspective, their own belief regarding issues. If they're in AP government, they're obviously getting a pretty deep understanding of American government, its history and its functioning. If they're doing PBA News with Bill Mensch, they're understanding the role of, or taking journalism, they're understanding the role of the media and the news. In a more personal level, in some of the classes I teach where I've seen success, we've run mock trials similar to what Jeff was talking about. We usually look at the student rights cases from the Supreme Court, and so that's usually something that really grabs their attention. Issues of illegal search and seizure, freedom of speech, freedom of press, student newspapers. And so, in the past, we've explored those cases, and the students were very interested. And then I can't take credit for it, but a couple of years back, some of my colleagues decided to make it into a mock trial. And at times, they even get the Bennington courthouse open, and they hold it down there. So that's gives it a little air of formality. So the students argue those cases. So that's something that's been successful. The idea of speeches, something I definitely do. I look at when I do my AP history class, we look at the reformers of the 1840s and 50s, and then we also look at the progressive movement in the early 20th century. And they take on characters, and so these are people who are very engaged, and they give a speech that's trying to encourage people to join their movement, and so they're thinking about it from that perspective, and they borrow lines from their speeches as well. As I mentioned earlier, as sophomores, we look at the expansion of rights in a democratic society, and so they explore the history of it. And then one of the things we've had them do in the past is kind of identify as a final exam what they think are the most successful strategies when trying to bring about change. And for them to identify an issue currently that they would want to address, and what strategies they would use to try to bring about change for that issue. And that's an area where the students really are engaged, or interested, and they're active. The challenge, or where I'd like to see it go further, is when it comes to that next step, where making it a reality, making sure they really kind of go out and do something with it. This past December, I was in Washington, D.C. at a social studies conference, and I happened to hear Ralph Nader speak. And regardless of how you feel about seatbelts, or the 2000 election, one of the things he said that kind of stuck with me was this idea of closing the loop. That you provide all this knowledge, you provide this education, you hopefully foster this interest, but then how do you take it to the next level? Actually have them out in the community doing something. Have them trying to actually bring about the change you've been talking about. So you think about that project I briefly described. You've got them understanding the different strategies. You've got them understanding the history of a movement. You've got them identifying a current issue that they see they want to address, and then how do you then bring it to the next step and have them do something with it? And that, I think, would be that's kind of the piece where I'd love to do more, because I think that's the stuff that would get them more invested and more likely to continue to participate moving forward outside of school. We've all had students, and as they've come up through, who eventually get involved in politics. But and there's those students are going to continue to come our way, and there's some that are really passionately interested in it. But probably the bigger challenge is how we get more students who maybe aren't. That's not their sole passion, but we want to make sure that they're interested, engaged, invested in it.
Thank you. So the next thing we'd like to hear you talk about are some of the challenges that you face trying to meet your goals as civics educators.
Okay, well, not to beat a dead horse here, but there's this time thing. So civics is a part of our social studies curriculum. You throw economics in there and history and I'm trying to think of all the others. Geography, thank you. Yeah, there's a bunch. So civics is a part of the social studies curriculum. Social studies is a part of our overall curriculum, which includes math, science, reading and writing. And it's marginalized in public education anyway. And I'm not going to blame anybody for that. It's just marginalized, and we have to kind of bring it out of other things. You can use math, you can use reading, you can use science, literacy to understand civic literacy better. But as far as explicit civic literacy, we're talking about like the debates and how much time it takes to do a debate and really teach it well and get into that. It's tough to fit it in. It's tough to squeeze it in with everything else. So that's probably the biggest challenge for me. I think another challenge, especially with kids and when you get into some of these current events or issues that are really hot button topics that you don't want to squash it because this is important stuff, but emotions run high. And in a classroom of 19 kids, 10-year-old kids or 9-year-old kids, having emotions run high is not always a beneficial thing. I mean, passion is good, but feelings get hurt. And so it's really tough to get around that one. I think that, the social curriculum that we use, teaching respect and teaching how to argue with respect, that's helpful. But still, you get into certain topics and it just gets emotional, and this can happen very quickly. And it's tough to bring it back down. And then if you have, if you're talking about 40 minutes for social studies in a 6-hour day, you've got to bring it down at some point. And that's always tricky. You can say, let's continue this tomorrow. Okay, now we're going to fit it in tomorrow. I had other plans.
Pushing everything back.
I had other plans. So the scheduling is tough and squeezing it in is tough.
Yeah, I mean, time. I mean, that's the thing. At Maple Street right now, with all the classes 5th through 8th, they're double blocked. So these kids are having an hour and a half every other day of social studies, and I've never had a problem with oh my gosh, this is too long, too much time. You do a little break in the middle. I do a lot of project-based stuff. But that is a time, it takes a lot of time. Sometimes you feel, I think I remember the first year I taught, the students came back to do a Washington trip, the 8th graders, they came back, and whoever took the kids down there said, well, we met Leahy, and there was some question, and it was like, who was your other senator? And the kids didn't know, or something. And I thought, oh my gosh, I didn't cover that, that fact. And that speaks to the civics literacy test, the immigration test, and there's been a pretty big movement to make this mandatory across, 50 states, starting in Arizona. It was very big, and a lot of facts. How many years is a senator in there for? So many facts, and some are very good, but you're torn between feeling as though you're gauged sometimes by the parents who, when the kids were little, were saying, I just want this whole child educated and just to feel warm and go out in the world and challenge it all. But as they get to the end, they say, but they don't know this fact. Like, how can they not know that? The JFK, they're not connecting that with the Cuban Missile Crisis? Like, where'd you go wrong on that, And so you kind of get in this quandary there sometimes, and over this, what is really a basic sort of core knowledge of facts that is helpful for them when they are debating things, when they are considering a sense of time, what's happened before, what's happened after, trying to do that, trying to cover all your geography. Somebody says, how do they not know all the state capitals? How do they not know this mountain range is over on this side? That falls under the umbrella of social studies. The political spectrum. They don't fully understand that. That falls there. There's a lot of hats to be worn in social studies, and just having the time to do that. I think you do feel sometimes like as though you let the child go, and it's like they're driving the car for the first time without you, and they drive off and say, oh my gosh, I never taught him how to change a tire, and you think, oh, I hope nobody notices, and I hope he never gets a flat tire. And that's it. And I think all teachers all say that. And the more partnership you have with parents to carry it on so that it doesn't just 2 steps forward in school and then 2 steps back. If there's something to go home to, just listening to the news on the way to school, or talking about it, anything and keeping the kids interested and saying, I want to understand what's happening in this big event right now. I don't understand it. So, time.
Yeah, I'd echo time as well. I could argue that it would be great if kids had a civics class, an economics class, where there's a lot of world history to cover. There's an awful lot of there's U.S. history to cover, and that that's not even all the social studies. But then the math teachers want to teach math, and the science teachers think believe science is important, and art teachers want the arts, and I support all of those. So how do you get all foreign language? How do you fit that all in? And so that becomes the challenge. And so, at Burton, their students are required to take 4 years of social studies. Some take more than that. Some take electives. But 4 classes, you can't quite get it all in. So, I think the attempt is made to kind of spread it out and to expose them. But more time would be wonderful. And the logistics of it, as the other gentleman said, the setting up the stuff that really sometimes is the most intriguing and engaging takes a lot of time. And then that idea of kind of bringing it outside of school, there's an awful lot of logistics that would go in, that could potentially go into that as well. And when you start doing that, you start sacrificing other areas. And so finding that balance.
So our final question is, how do you think we as community members can help to support you in the work that you're doing as educators with civics literacy, and how can we help the growth of that in general in the community?
Okay. Well, this is a start. I mean, having all of you guys here and interested in this topic is really a big start. I never really quite understand how much the community supports one subject or another. So knowing that there's a large enough group that's interested in civics education is really important. I think that's something that would go to the school board, and maybe you talk about that time issue. We want to see more civics in the classroom. We want to see more civics education in some of these debates and trials and things like that. I think hosting them, in a place like the courthouse, that's a great idea. Having Jeff's dad come in or someone come in and be the judge or be a Senate, have a Senate involved. That kind of involvement is great. Certainly taking the kids out to vote, having voting parties. Gosh, there's so many ways, aren't there, to move towards having everybody involved in civic engagement. I think it just has to be more normalized maybe and more public. It's sort of hidden right now. You go, in New York State where I grew up, you went behind the curtain to vote. And that was really kind of weird. Now that I live in Vermont, it's like, yeah, why do we need the curtain?
Yeah.
Somebody's going to ask you who you voted for when you walked out anyway.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of support is good. Just having it be a part of life, and the kids see it that way. It's just a modeling thing. It's normal for them to be a part of it.
It's funny, I saw this question, I said, well, this is the hard one, and I would ask people, I asked Dad, and I asked some other people, and then the conversation would keep coming back, and I said, but that sounds like that's going to be a teacher thing. That is a great idea, and I'm going to put that in my teacher book, but that's not happening within the community. And so, one of the things I feel is the importance of Election Day. I just feel there needs to be something more, and that happens community by community. And I'm not necessarily talking about federal holiday, which has its own. There's lots to debate about that, but something about that to really punch it up a little. And I could see long term there being some things done before that in the schools. I actually during the I don't know which election this was. I think this was the primary, and I think I had all my students in the upper grade vote. We all had to be very informed about the presidential primary, who was out there, and all candidates. And I said, I will vote for whoever you guys vote for. But I had to do a lot of research online first. I thought, is this illegal? No money's, am I allowed to do that? They're informing me. And it really got the kids really interested. They couldn't wait to find out. I wouldn't tell them till after I'd actually voted. And the next day, and I said, and they were like, you're not going to really do it. I said, I will vote exactly how you guys vote. And that was it got the kids very interested in the primary. And so that was, I didn't expect it to be as successful as it was. But it's those kind of things that maybe a lead up I could see, and even just, I don't know, flags, something going on, something that makes Election Day really feel like it's happening. And I thought that's something that I could see the community pulling together in some sort of way. And the other thing that just came to me today was we do the National GOB, National Geographic GOB. It's a lot of fun. It's incredibly difficult. But some sort of a civics bee is something we could do. I mean, it could be done here where kids, it's just civics questions, it's fun, but it could be something that could be developed and just something that's local. I haven't seen anything out there on any national level that I've seen, but that could be something that's sort of fun too, to cultivate the importance of it. Those were just two ideas that really don't fall on the teacher, because that's what it kind of kept coming back to. So
GNAT's new TV show.
Civic, yeah, that's another thing. Yeah.
I would just add modeling. I think that's a key piece that the community can do. So hosting events like this, forming groups, having your can we talk, can we listen discussions, participating, being civically engaged. People are on the school board, people are on the select boards in towns. People, if you want to think about community, people are on volunteer rescue squads and fire departments. And so when students see that modeling from their teachers, from their parents, from other relatives, and from adults in their community, I think that's important. So, on top of what these guys said, I would add just being civically literate and engaged yourselves.
I'd just like to say thank you to our extraordinary panel. We are so fortunate to have these wonderful teachers in our community. We are so fortunate, and hopefully you all will want to continue in helping our community foster our need for democracy, starting with children, but moving on, as you said, to engaging programs for adults. So at this point, I'd just like to say thank you, and also if anybody has any questions, this is a great time. And if you have to leave early, there's a sign-up sheet down there. If anybody'd like to be further involved, just leave us your name and your contact information, and we'll see what happens. So thank you again for coming.
I imagine they block the doors so people can't get in the cafe. So come and get me if you have to leave early, and I'll make sure that you can get out.
Okay. We'll see Barbara.
You're a captive audience.
So any questions? Yes.
More of a comment. A panel can respond if they wish. I think that our country is really a young country compared to the history of the world and the history of other nations, and we do so little with our history. Jeff began to comment on it. I think we talked about federal holidays. If you think about all of our federal holidays are celebrated on a Monday, and all of them are celebrated by white sales. Automobile sales, 50% off on the refrigerator, and this contributes to civic illiteracy as opposed to civic literacy. Where the understanding of our history and the understanding of what makes the United States great and what makes the democracy as great as it is and why it's so important to participate in it. That democracy is not, it isn't a sport where you sit back and you watch it. It's a participatory activity. It's not a spectator sport. And not understanding the history and not understanding why it's something that you work to defend and you work to participate in, is something that comes from understanding the history and celebrating the history and understanding, what has led to what makes it, as the Donald would say, great, and worth fighting for and worth celebrating and worth participating in. So celebrating your holidays by selling linens does nothing to promote civic literacy.
One thing I'm wondering what you might all feel about this topic, and that's our town meeting, which is so unique to Vermont. And yet it's kind of dwindled down to the same old people coming, the same old process. A lot of people worried about the length of the meeting. What can we do to energize the town meeting, perhaps using our schools and getting the kids interested in what town meeting is and why they should go, why their parents should go? It's so unique.
I often encourage kids to, when town meeting day comes, I often encourage kids to tell their parents to go to town meeting day. I mean, I don't want kids to be bossy with their parents, of course, but they do have some influence. And when parents notice that their kids are interested in something like that, then they might go. Maybe that works one time out of 10.
Would they go if you assigned it as a project?
Yes, they probably would.
Yeah, I mean, I think town meeting is so unique, and it comes up, again, I'm teaching 5th through 8th, and it comes up as we talk about different forms of government, even going back to ancient Greece, and talk about feudalism, and then we'll talk about the development of government here, and the uniqueness of town meetings and sort of its history. In terms of yeah, in terms of getting it to carry over in some way that would generate a wider interest and participation in the town meeting, I haven't broached that yet. But we have played around with their own town meetings sometimes, just so they sort of understand it. And I talk a lot about the value of public speaking, and the value of the fact that everybody in your town has a voice and an opinion. And it is for me when I go to town meeting, the most enjoyable part is the people who I've seen but I've never spoken to, or wouldn't really assume that they have something they've really got to get off their chest, and they stand up and very eloquently, very clearly raise a point that nobody else has considered, and it really changes the nature of the discussion fairly immediately. And from all socioeconomic levels, and in that sense, the town meeting is, I really like that aspect of it. And so when I talk to the kids about the power of public speaking, even for the students that are really scared of standing up, even in our school, our small classes, is just if you have the power to persuade people. And that, I think, the town meeting is where you get to do that. And you don't really get to do that in other aspects where anybody from the community is going to be able to stand up when you're debating what's happening over this next year. So that seed is planted. I don't know how far it goes. So
I would just add, I think if we can find a way to get students involved in the town meeting, then they become more interested in attending. So if there's some...
Or participating in office when they get
Yes,
older.
something along those lines. I think that would be a way to find more.
And we need more young people to get involved in politics locally.
is there a high school member of the select board? Is there a high school age member of this? Has that ever been proposed? That's happened in communities, right?
I think they have trouble keeping them. It's not only the select board, but the planning commission.
Yeah.
And the board of civil, another one, I forget.
Yeah. Well, those things can be so interesting to some of us, but not all of us. Right? Selectmen. Yeah.
Yes.
I understand the difficulty of fitting everything in that many of us senior age think kids of a certain age should know. But just before I came, I read over the 100 questions on the naturalization test, and everybody in this room would get 199, really. And they're just basic things that you should know about the Constitution and how our government functions. So I do feel that there is a core literacy that the kids should come out of high school with. And when I was on the school board, I also felt there was a core knowledge that 8th graders should go to Burn Burton.
Oh, yeah.
You have any of you examined that test and
I use it for fun.
Yeah.
I do not make that but it is fun. I've totally taken the kids and said, okay, you are going for your citizenship test, and I get a spotlight and I pick one kid and put him in front of everybody, because the immigration test is an oral exam. It's not multiple choice. They know what the 100 questions are, but they don't know what they'll be asked, and they have to get 6 out of the 10 right. So every once in a while, just for fun, it's not for real. And you got to get 6, and we kind of keep track. And did you pass or did you not pass? And it's tough. You start focusing on that and make it an actual thing they have to pass, then yeah, you can have everybody know those facts. But I don't know that when we're talking about civic literacy, I feel like the bigger thing is civic involvement, being an active participant, understanding why this is a problem that's happening in your town or your local government, your national government. Why is this an issue? How do you feel about it? Are you going to go to the voting booth and you're going to do something about it? do you know how many years the senator is elected for? Like that, I don't know that those, but correlate in some way, but I totally understand. I go through those questions, it's like, yeah, they should know these things, but I don't know. I have some kids where they just, the law of the land, they know the Constitution, but you ask, what's the law of the land? I'm not sure. So do they understand the Constitution, or do they not just get that question right?
Well, my follow-up on that really has to do with what we saw when I was at Middlebury. What happened a few months ago there, which would be inconceivable for any student to want to shut down a discussion. It just wouldn't have arisen.
Same for me. I felt the same way.
So the press was saying that that this is a nationwide phenomenon. That kids are coming into college with not a very good understanding of the First Amendment and willingness to support it. What are your thoughts on that?
I would hope that, or I believe the students that leave Burton that come through, our schools aren't those students. They are getting exposed, as you've heard tonight, at various levels. It is the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the history of it, the function of it is part of the curriculum at BVA. I think the issue you bring up probably speaks to a larger issue within society, where the polarization that's occurring and the belief that there's less room for discussion or debate or dialogue, and a feeling of this mentality, this idea, this belief is what's right and the other side is wrong, and there's no room in between, and there's no reason to give a platform for that debate. It's a scary thought, but I think that's what you're getting at.
Sorry. Go ahead. Okay. We've all touched on current events. How do you, in this current situation, talk about current events right now? I mean, how do you just let the students talk about it? How do you keep your own personal feelings out of what's happening while trying to let them talk about it?
I'm an enigma to my kids. It bugs them a lot because I always, whenever they lean one way, I'll get them to go one way, and then I flip side, and they always want to know my opinion, and I never say anything. And you have to definitely watch your language sometimes, particularly the last election, or it could be the Ebola epidemic that was going to hit us. I remember that specifically with one class was a big issue, and you could tell some kids were coming with very clear opinions that were definitely trickled down from parents, and I had to kind of dance around it without making it sound like that opinion is, washing away whatever they were saying, and then having it come back later and having a parent say, you're telling my kid he's totally wrong. You have to be careful at the middle school level. But I really think it's so important, current events. I mean, when we talk about entry points, those are great access points. It's ways of jumping anything that's happening in current events. There's just so many ways to jump back to the historical lead up to these things. So it's tough. I was asked when we came in, how are you going to talk about Charlottesville if it comes up? A fifth grader it might not come out, but if that's the youngest, if he's the youngest, the youngest child in the family, and their brother or sister is in high school, that conversation could be happening at the kitchen table, and they've already got a lot of information and they're trying to process it. You have to change it a little, but I think you still have to address their curiosity and redirect it in the right direction. But I just feel like you just have to do it. It's very important, I think.
Sometimes, it also depends on the situation. If you have a current event that involves people getting hurt, that depending on the magnitude of it, you may want to just ask kids if there's anything they want to talk about, at your morning meeting or some part of the day, just so they can get something off their chest. And then it's time to just be the listener, because they're going to speak in their own, they're going to use their own language, they're going to use their own, they have their own thoughts about it. And I don't want to influence them on topics like that. Those, they may need some comfort, at fourth grade level anyway. They may need some words of assurance that they're safe. But other topics, I think, like you're saying, Jeff, it's, you get some of these publications, some magazines, current events publications that do a really good job of presenting topics for kids to talk about that they may not be aware of because they don't watch the news or they don't listen to the news. They're not aware of it. Maybe they're home, they just don't worry about the news in their home. That happens a lot. So bringing those publications in is a great way to kick off a topic.
Yeah. So as Suzanne said in your introduction, there were a bunch of us who got together right after the election because we were concerned about the results, frankly, of what was happening, and we even during our first meeting, we concluded that the way we could turn this around was to become involved at a local level and try and do some good. And it all starts with us, basically, and with each one of us. And so I guess my question is there a role for a group of us who would love to help out or get involved in some way in the schools at any level? I mean, speaking for myself, if there was a way that, I could, if there were kids who needed extra help, or even in the classroom, if we could be there to encourage discussion on certain topics. I don't know what our role would be, but I don't know if that's something that you would welcome or not.
So when I did this debate this past year about the tensions building up to the American Revolution, Suzanne Wardway was there, Irene Nadler was there, and I remember after the debate, Suzanne asked if she could talk to the kids, and because she was really blown away by what they did. And I said, yeah, we took a few minutes there, and I really think it made a big impact on them to hear someone else, not just me, going wow, 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 wow all the time. Somebody else saying, what important work this is that they just did. I mean, just to validate what they did, and they worked so hard to get there. Even though it was a mock debate, it wasn't, it wasn't for real. It was for fun and for learning. But Suzanne, really, I think you did a great job just telling them, or just validating the work they did, and telling them how important this is in our times, and that we're not just living in a fantasy world where things just happen. We are the instigators, we are the enablers, we are the workers, we are the people who make things happen, every one of us. And I think it's important that the kids understand that. So if you could come in when there was something happening like a debate, I mean, you could be part of helping the kids maybe decorate the classroom, like at my grade level, that's always a fun thing for the kids. They get really into that, and it's an enormous amount of work for the teacher to rally around all that. It's crazy. So times like that, actually, those debates, like you were saying, they take a lot of time and energy. Those would be good times for you to come into the classroom and just be like, what can I do to help you? Come up to a group of kids and ask how you can help them out with something.
Well, we might get together a group of people and maybe send you a list of who you could contact.
Yeah,
or
that would be great.
Go through Suzanne. I mean, yeah.
I think at the high school level, the other piece too is that making students aware that groups like this exist, and possibly inviting them to participate and get involved.
That's our next step. Yeah.
That's another piece.
Yeah.
I was just thinking about, how you could get involved in the schools. And I'm thinking once a month, MIMS does, and I know the other schools probably do also, an all-school meeting. And I'm thinking how we talked about those special holidays that we no longer really recognize anymore. Well, what if at those times we had special presentations from the community, maybe about town hall meetings, maybe about, you know, Lincoln's birthday and why we celebrate it. That might be another avenue to kind of inform and get the community and children involved at the same time. I think that would be helpful. We welcome that if anyone's interested.
Yes,
I applaud your efforts with the things you're doing, and it's encouraging to hear the things you're doing. I think in current events, government, Constitution are so important to teach today. I think a lot of our citizens are coming out of school without the knowledge of those things, how they work, what's expected of them as citizens. I think democracy, all it asks of its citizens is that they become involved enough or pay attention enough to what's going on in their town, their state, their nation, their world, so that they are informed to step into that voting booth. When you think that approximately 50% of the eligible electorate in this country did not get off the couch. They step into that voting booth. It's appalling in the so-called greatest democracy in the world. I don't think you can emphasize enough what you guys are doing, and keep it up. I think all those things need to be in the curriculum and even more.
Can I just comment on what you just said? So, I mean, in 4th grade, boy, the kids really do believe in democracy. They really believe that this works and that they can make it work. And I'm not sure what happens in high school, but it seems to be nowadays that people reach adulthood and they don't believe in it anymore. They don't think it's going to work. They don't think it matters. There's a lot of apathy out there. So something happens. I don't know if it's the media. I mean, our system certainly has its faults. But there's a point where I think when we become adults, we become disenfranchised with the whole thing. And for a lot of people, it sticks. So I don't know if that carries through high school or what, but the kids' enthusiasm in 4th grade was mind-blowing for me. I was really blown over by the whole thing.
There's somebody behind us, but
I
stand up.
Sure. I just want to jump back like 5 questions. I also teach social studies in middle school down in Bennington and MWS. And we do a lot of current events also. And I find that a lot of alternative facts make their way into our discussions of current events. And like you, I try to keep myself an enigma, but I can't when it comes to opinions that are based on really non-existent or very poorly interpreted facts. So I'm wondering how you guys deal with those in a sensitive way.
Well, to me, I mean, that's one more literacy, media literacy, and research literacy, and I feel honestly there is some where I'm in middle school, I could say, just want to set you up, get you thinking about this, and I'll throw it to high school and let them like nail out the details. So all I'm gonna get you thinking about is where are you getting your information? You should be doing okay. High school can figure out exactly, really vetting your sites really well. I mean, they are, kids now have access to so much information, but it's so much information, and what is accurate, what is a good source, what is not a good source, teaching them that. There's another thing that's taking up our time, where we can't teach some of these other things, but it's very important. And so they gotta get sick of it. You know, where's your source? Where'd you get this information? I tell them a lot that they should treat social studies, these questions, just like science. They should try and prove themselves wrong. They should see, you know, you have this opinion, wherever you got it, I don't know, but you have this opinion, go out and try and prove yourself wrong. And if you can't prove yourself wrong, well then maybe it speaks to that your opinion is that much stronger, because I'm having a difficult time convincing myself the other way. But be open-minded. Debate process, I love doing the, where does everybody stand on this? And then forcing them to be on the other side, teaching them the value of fully understanding the other side of the argument, if not only just to say it'll make your argument stronger, because you'll know what they're going to say. I'm a Yankee fan. I bring up the Yankee-Red Sox debate all the time, and I say, if you're a Yankee fan, you really need to understand those Red Sox arguments about who's the best team. You know, I mean, you really need to understand that and be prepared. And if you don't have anything to counter, I mean, what's the worst that can happen? You change your mind, which would be very difficult for me to do on that issue. But I think that's part of it. While you're dancing around the words you're using and not, you know, stepping on anybody's toes, but at the same time, just getting that. Constantly think about where are they getting in their information? Can they find out other information to support that and go against that? And also just what do you really know? I mean, again, Charlottesville, I mean, that's what if the kids are going to ask us, what do you know? And they'll realize they don't know a lot, you know. But it is tough. I mean, it's just the dance.
Yeah, I think when kids come out with those alternative facts, I think it's great to throw the challenge out there. Well, can anyone find some information before, you know, this time tomorrow that counters that? And they enjoy that. There's always a couple of people who want to take that right to the time.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think you walk that line between making sure that there's room for multiple perspectives and sides and voices, but at the same time understanding that that doesn't mean that the door's open for everything, regardless of its authenticity. And you know, there comes a point where you have a responsibility to carefully, diplomatically, at times, kind of not allow that to pervert the process and the understanding. But I go back and agree that the more knowledge, the more information they have, making sure that they're informed, that they're informed when it comes to their positions, that they're informed decisions, they're informed perspectives, that they have the skills with since anybody with a computer and access to the internet can basically become supposedly be an expert. That ability to for them to have the skills, the tools to interpret, understand, evaluate the information is vital.
Gee, in your school situations, what that affects the daily life of the school is a decision made by the people up here that in some way, shape, or manner could be turned around to let the students have a say or a vote in something. I know when I used to be in boarding school, it was always a question of uniforms, for example. But is there anything in the life of the school at these levels that needs to be changed, or it would be nice if it could be, that you could say to a class, okay, what would make such and such better? What would make our lunch program better? What would make this or that? And do you do anything like that?
I'm thinking about the donuts in the cafeteria. Is that what you were thinking? Yeah, there are food choices, healthy food choices that they can argue for or against coming out of the cafeteria. Certainly, I think that we have a pretty good thing going with the all-school meetings where the kids run a good part of that meeting and decide what goes in there and what they'd like to do with it. Rules, the rules, student councils, just creating a set of school rules or a contract, a social contract. That's up to the kids. We mediate that at the school. So that involves all grade levels.
Yeah. I wasn't going to speak. I'm Corey Harrington. I teach up at the high school, and I was just here to support my boss, Mr. Graff. We do at the high school have a kind of a student policy board, and so they kind of meet with one of our dean students, and they'll talk about school policies, and then they'll kind of make some presentations to our headmaster, and he'll make a decision on whether or not to kind of tweak that. So that is a great avenue at the schools. You know, hey, what do you want to fix about the school? Any kid can talk about that.
Yeah.
You know, Jeff's talking about some gateways. That's a great way to start.
Yeah.
It's a great segue, and then you can move on to some other issues. So good question.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I was thinking that our student council, of course, in middle school, our student council is made up of 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, and you know, what can you really be bringing up? I was thinking ours, and I think we're moving this way, is to make it a little more have more of an impact, but also try and at the same time have it maybe reflect our own government, having maybe chosen senators, elected senators and representatives, something so that you're kind of doubling up on what you're trying to teach about the nature of our government and how it's formed and its structure, and have something other than what's going to happen at the dance. A few years ago, we did have a student who came to school and had a very wide streak of blue in her hair. And apparently in the handbook, there was a policy about how much hair color you could have. And I think it was like a very thin strand. And this 8th grade class, they brought it to me, and it kind of was not, higher up wasn't necessarily thankful about this at the time, because it caused a little bit of a problem. But I said, well, if you don't like it, find the section in the handbook that says it, rewrite it, and present it as a you know, what you want to do. And I told them you should go for the gold, go big, and then you get to back off and look like you're compromising. Okay? And I set the whole thing up, and it was great. It was a good lesson in that. It was a good lesson in writing, because their first draft was filled with mistakes. And I said, and now nobody knows your message, because all they can pay attention to is how you didn't know how to spell this and this homonyms, that. And they learned, and they passed it through, and they did change it to a slightly wider strand. One color, just I think an inch wide or something like that.
The victims think of all of this.
What do you mean, the person who first colored? Yeah, she was very happy. She spearheaded it, and it went very well. And Fran, at the time, she did a great job. She worked with him, but she was very hard on him about language, and it worked out really well. But those opportunities haven't come up that much. So, you know, the more we can do to make it relevant and real, and things that really impact them.
But to go back to the question you asked about what can the community do, you all still have community service, do you not, in your schools? So what you're saying is, how do we set up an adult community service in the school, I think, is what you're sort of indicating.
You know, one thing I want to do with one of my groups is come up with a website that we would pull together of there's so much volunteer work in this town. I mean, there always has been. And there's so many volunteer organizations, and just even having a list of all those organizations and what they do and who to contact, and then having the kids come up with ways that they could help out, instead of saying, hi, can I help you? What do you want me to do? I can only imagine that can be really difficult sometimes, and you want to help out, but you know, if the kids come with an idea, but in terms of the organizations that they can help out, and then it could be a website where there's projects that kids have done in the past to hopefully inspire kids to come up with something new or similar that they might want to do.
Right, Jeff, wouldn't have called when the Secretary of State gave the list of nonprofits.
I'm just thinking locally, just like right here. I don't know if calling the state, but that's great. Yeah.
And they give you the ones in this community.
They will?
I would think.
Then I will have one of my students do that.
They can find out if that is one of the duties of the Secretary.
Yeah, this is what I tell my kids all the time. Go figure it out. So you're just telling me to go figure it out.
Any other questions or comments?
I want to just make one comment. I wish any one of you had been my teacher.
I'd just like to tell a little story about a student that Eric and I shared this past year. She came to return a book to me, and she said, "We're having this debate. Do you have time to come?" And it just so happened it was at my planning period, so I was just thrilled. And we talked a little bit, and she said to me, "I want to be president of the United States." The hair on my arms. I said, "Well, tell me more." I said, "What are you thinking?" And she said, "Well, first I want to be an attorney." And she said, "And then I want to be an immigration attorney." I said, "Well, tell me more." And she said, "Well, you know, she's Jamaican." And she said, a lot of people are being deported, and you know, you need a green card, and I'm really interested in that. So, Eric, you never know where your influence is going to go, and you never know what's going to plant in a student's heart because of what you do. And so I said to her, I said, "I want you to make sure that every year you tell your teachers your intention, so that can be stroked and developed." And also, Eric's 4th grade student won the spelling bee, the geography bee.
Oh yeah, that's right.
So
the National Geographic.
Oh yeah.
The only elementary kid in the whole thing was all middle school kids.
Wow.
He didn't win. He got 2nd place.
Wow.
Second place. Okay. So you never know where your influence will reach, as they say. Thank you.
And I would like to thank the audience for coming and participating.
Yes.
Thank you.